Welcome to the Brigham Young Exterminates the Timpanogos Indian People Battle at Fort Utah 1850 video. Pictured above, Brigham Young, the prophet, around this time period, 1850. All right, according to the Wikipedia article, Battle at Fort Utah, this battle is also known as the Provo River Massacre or the Fort Utah Massacre. Right when Provo, Utah was getting established, it was called Fort Utah, and then later on it became Provo. Pictured above, a picture of what Fort Utah may have looked like at the time, around 1850. Of course, this is a Mormon hotbed now. This is where BYU is, and that's where I went to school. Okay, let's go over some statements by Brigham Young here to start off this video. LDS Journal History, May 12th, 1851. So, over a year after this battle occurred, Prophet Brigham Young, the Lord could not have devised a better plan than to have put the saints where they were to help bring about the redemption of the Lamanites. Like in Utah Territory, I guess. And also make them a white and delightsome people. Controversial teaching that the Native American Indians who were brown, if they were righteous, they could one day become a white and delightsome people. Of course, that's a teaching that's in the Book of Mormon. All right, the prophet Brigham Young, quoting Joseph Smith, a supposed unrecorded prophecy of Joseph Smith. Not sure if he really ever said anything like this. Wouldn't put it past Brigham Young just to make stuff up. Thomas Bullock meeting minutes, February 10th, 1850. So February 10th, 1850 was right when this battle at Fort Utah was happening, is when Brigham Young said this. So Brigham says many of the Lamanites will have to be slain or killed. Slain or killed. Mormons call the Native American Indians Lamanites because they have a supposed history in the Book of Mormon of them. And they're called Lamanites in the Book of Mormon. Of course, that is not a real history. And there never were any people called Lamanites, except for after the fact. Brigham continues talking about these unredeemable Indians that will be better off on the other side of the veil. In other words, these Lamanites or Native American Indians will be better off dead. Pretty harsh things to say, and he's saying, I have it from the highest source here, right? Joseph Smith, the first prophet of the church, he's right up there with Jesus and God, that a lot of these Lamanites are going to have to be killed, and they're better off on the other side of the veil. And we have an AI picture here of a Native American Indian, a chief, kind of floating on the clouds. Maybe he had passed on to the other side of the veil, where he's better off, according to Brigham. And, made with AI, which a lot of these pictures in here are going to be AI. All right, Prophet Brigham Young, August 31st, 1856, Journal of Discourses, Volume 4. So this is, over 6 years after the battle at Fort Utah. It's an interesting acknowledgement from the Prophet Brigham Young about the Native American Indians owning the land, basically. But that didn't stop him from didn't stop Brigham from clearing the Indians off of the land. The Fort Utah battle, one of those examples. I'm not sure why he's saying this, but Brigham says, we are on the natives' land, or the Lamanites' land, for it belongs to them as much as any soil ever belonged to any man on earth. We are drinking their water, using their fuel and timber, and raising food from their ground. So he acknowledges this, but then he just takes everything. Really, he kills them off, a lot of them off. Takes their water, takes their wood, their fuel, and their timber, and they raise their food on the Native American Indians' ground. All right, Prophet Brigham Young again, Journal History, May 16th, 1851, so about a year after the fact here. Also shows up in Wilford Woodruff's journal. This idea of the Lamanites or the Native American Indians being Gadianton robbers. The Gadianton robbers are mentioned in the Book of Mormon as well. They were supposedly an unredeemable, depraved, and arrogant band of thieves. And the Indians that were in Utah were their descendants, right? I shouldn't laugh. It is sad and serious. But, hey, sometimes we laugh to cope, right? So Brigham says the children of the Gadianton robbers, or the Native American Indians, who had infested the mountains for more than 1,000 years, I guess they're in Utah, and had lived by plundering all the time. The ones in Utah are the children of these Gadianton robbers who are evil, basically. And they live by plunder. For this thousands of years? I don't think so. I don't think they were plundering. I think they were hunting and gathering and eating fish. All right, the prophet Brigham Young, in a source here, articles of agreement and conversation made and concluded at Spanish Fork, documents relating to the negotiation of unratified treaties. National Archives, microfilm at BYU Library. Not sure the date here. Brigham says, if the Native American Indians do not sell their land to the government will take it, and we, the Mormons, shall occupy this valley, and the next valley, and the next, and so on, until we occupy the whole of them, the whole of all the valleys. He wants all the good land, pretty much. Kill off most of them, and then any remaining, push them off into this small reservation in Uinta, the Uinta mountain area, which we'll get to at the end of the video. An area that didn't have a whole lot of resources, not very valuable land, not even really enough resources for the Indians to survive out there. All right, a little bit about Brigham Young's arrogance here. This is a letter, I guess, or a document that Brigham Young sent to a bunch of the Native American Indian chiefs. I'm not going to try to say their names here. Some of them are kind of hard. One was Walker, one was Blackhawk. You can see the other ones here. He's calling these Indians chiefs good Indian chiefs. May 6, 1850, so a couple months after this battle. Brigham Young office files. So Brigham here showing his arrogance, saying, God talks to the Mormon chief. Who's the Mormon chief? Brigham Young, right? The prophet. God talks to this Mormon chief, and therefore Indians must do as God tells them through the Mormon chief. And be good and learn to work and raise grain and learn all that the Mormons know. So Brigham doesn't only speak for the Mormon people and speaking for God or speaking for the Lord. He also speaks for God to the Indian people, right? And so the Indian people have to obey Brigham because he speaks for God. This is way too much power for any person to have, right? Because they can basically just tell you anything they want you to do, and you have to do it because that's what God wants you to do. This AI image makes Brigham look a little too fat here. Brigham did have red hair and red beard, as you can see, and he's dressed up like a chief, right? Brigham is the big Mormon chief. All right, the prophet Brigham Young in a speech to the Deseret legislature in the diaries of John D. Lee. The prophet Brigham does not want to live among the natives and take them into his arms until the curse is removed from off of them. What was the curse on the Indians? We talked about it a little bit. They were cursed with the dark skin. You can read about that in the Book of Mormon. It talks about it, the curse of dark skin. And when it's removed, they can become a white and delightsome people, right? All right, same source here. The prophet Brigham Young in a speech to the Deseret legislature. Brigham says this present race of Indians will never be converted. The Mormons tried. The Indians didn't really accept much of what they had to say. They have their own beliefs, right? Brigham says, if they were all killed off, it mattereth not. Pretty harsh. Can't convert them. So if we kill them all off, it doesn't matter. All right, Brigham continues, we will take their native children and school them and teach them to be clean and to love morality. So, you know, these Indians are uneducated, according to the Mormon ways, right? They're dirty, and they don't have a good morality, right? Because they don't have the Mormon morality, right? So we got to take the children. Maybe we can do something with the children, not the adults, and we can teach them to be moral. All right, another statement here from the prophet Brigham Young, recorded by Thomas Bullock, meeting with the Utes in Utah, May 22nd, 1850, a few months after this battle at Fort Utah. Brigham Young office files here. So Brigham says, we the Mormons have come here to settle on your land, the natives' land, but our Father the Great Spirit, kind of what they called him in the Book of Mormon, right? Has plenty of land for you and for the Mormons. No, he doesn't. Brigham is lying here. He's going to take all the land eventually. There's not plenty of land for the natives. If any of you have esteemed us to be your enemies, it is because you have been enemies to us. Blame the victim. Gaslight. And what has passed this last winter at Fort Utah battle, we want forgotten. Yeah, just forget that we just wiped out all your men. And not have another occurrence, but we want to be as friends. We have many things to say to you when you understand them, to tell you of your forefathers, who were the Lamanites, right, and who they were. And we're going to tell you this false history of who your forefathers was. That's not true, and I don't think the Indians were interested in that. And then after this speech, Brigham Young speaks in tongues. Maybe he thinks the Lamanites can understand his strange gibberish. I'm not sure why he's speaking to them in tongues. Okay, the prophet Brigham Young and the minutes of May 26, 1850, General Church Minutes, Church History Library, May 26, 1850, so a few months after the battle. My or Brigham's natural disposition and taste loathes the sight of those degraded Indians. Brigham's natural disposition loathes the sight of those degraded Indians. Even though the Great Basin's Utes are as bright as any in America, he concluded that they are fallen in every respect. They are fallen in habits, custom, flesh, spirit, blood, and desire. So Brigham doesn't look too fondly upon these natives. All right, so that is a few preliminary statements from Brigham Young. Let's get to the story here. Wikipedia, Battle of Fort Utah. On March 10th, 1849, so about a year before the battle happened, Brigham Young assigned 30 families to settle Utah Valley. You can see where Utah Valley is here on this map, in the red square. That's Utah Lake there in the middle. And you can see the people that live there are the Timpanogos, or the Timpanogos people. These Mormons headed towards Timpanogos territory with 30 families or 150 people. All right, the Timpanogos viewed this as an invasion of their territory and their sacred land. This according to Fred A. Konata, The History of the Northern Ute People. All right, so let's talk a little bit about these Timpanogos people. They'd been there for, what, over 1,000 years. There's this Father Escalante that wrote about them in his journal, The Journeyings of Father Escalante, 1776. The battle at Fort Utah is 1850, so this is before any of the Mormons came in. Probably before any white people came in, right? So it's interesting to see this account and see how they lived. Father Escalante says this lake of Timpanogos, or Utah Lake, abounds in several kinds of good fish. As he's coming through in 1776, they have geese, beaver, and round about it are these Indians, the Timpanogos, who live on the abundant fish of the lake. Of course, that fish would go down as more and more settlers came in. All right, Father Escalante continues, 1776. I think this is the first time white people came into the area. Besides this, these Timpanogos people gather in the plain grass seeds. They gather these grass seeds from which they make a toll, which I guess is a hot drink, which they supplement by hunting hares, rabbits, and fowl, of which there is great abundance here. That great abundance would definitely go down. All right, their habitations are chozas, or little huts of willow, of which they also make nice baskets and other necessary utensils. Later on, those would be called wickiups, and this is kind of what they look like here above. All right, the most decent clothing that they wear is a buckskin jacket and long leggings made of the same material. Maybe kind of as pictured above. That's an AI image. For cold weather, they have blankets made of the skins of hares and rabbits. So rabbit fur blankets. All right, moving on to another source. There was a good book put out by Jared Farmer. It's called On Zion's Mount, Mormons, Indians, and the American Landscape, 2008. You can use that book quite a bit in this video. Jared is a professor of history at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. He says, as the settlers tried to move into the valley, it's the Mormons, they were actively blocked by a group of Timpanogos led by Ankartowets, with warnings that trespassing would be met with death. All right, another book that we'll be using is by D. Robert Carter, Founding Fort Utah, Provo's Native Inhabitants, 2003. He's an historian of Indians in Provo. Pretty decent book. I think he's a Mormon guy, though, and does leave out some controversial stuff, like especially statements from Brigham Young, like we already went over. But Carter suggests that Ankartowets was probably demanding a tribute for the travels of the caravan through their territory. All right, let's move on to another source by Carrie and Lisa Boren, the Utah Gold Rush 2002 book from Cedar Fort Publisher. Fairly apologetical publisher. Don't like to use them too much. Owned by a Mormon guy. But I think this account here is accurate. I saw this in another source. It says later a Timpanogos chief met with Dimmick Huntington, possibly Black Elk. Dimmick was interpreter between the Mormons and the Indians. Huntington said that the settlement would be beneficial for the Timpanogos. No, it wouldn't. And he reported that the leader consented to the Mormons settling there after Huntington swore that they would not drive the Timpanogos off of their lands or take away their rights. Well, not only would they drive them off, they would kill all the men and, of course, take all their resources. All right, there was a general authority that talked about this Fort Utah battle. He's a 70 and was church historian. His name is Marlin K. Jensen. He did an article in the Latter-day Saint Historical Studies, fall 2011. Haven't used that very much at all. He's fairly honest here. Marlin says, when the pioneers began to occupy and use the best pastures and fisheries and to displace the Indians in the Utah Valley, the Timpanogos, strong objections naturally arose from the Timpanogos. Feelings escalated, leading to a skirmish, later called the First Indian War, or the battle at Fort Utah, in which Mormon settlers killed approximately 100 Indians. That's kind of on the high end of the range of people killed. I don't like that he calls it a skirmish. I think it was more than a skirmish, which we'll get to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about numbers killed and wounded. The prophet and governor of Utah was Brigham Young, and he ordered about 100 Mormon men to shoot and kill between 40 and 100 Timpanogos Native American Indian men. Most of all the ones killed were men. Nearly all of the native men from this people were exterminated, and that's the language Brigham Young used, exterminate. One or two native women died as well. The Mormons lost only one man and had at least 7 wounded. So seemed to be pretty lopsided here. I think the Mormons had better technology, better guns, better strategy, which we'll get to all that. Sources for all this information will be given on upcoming slides. The professor and historian Jared Farmer, who we already talked about, estimates that the 100 number for the natives is probably more accurate. We'll get to his account, or his information. All of the Mormon men carried guns and ammunition. Carried ammunition. I think the Indians did too, but I think the Mormons had better guns. So Jared Farmer thinks it's on the higher end, the 100 number. If that is the case, it kind of puts it in the same realm as the Mountain Meadows Massacre. 7 years later, 120 white travelers were killed in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Mostly women and children in that one, though. So in that sense, it's way worse. Killing women and children, I think, and also some men in that one. But the numbers, if it's around 100, is similar to Mountain Meadows Massacre. But these were white people, right? So the Mountain Meadows Massacre got a lot more coverage. It's a lot more well known throughout history. A lot of these Indian battles have not been very well known at all until recently. And, books weren't even put out about them until, the last 10, 15 years. So yeah, for the Timpanogos, mostly men killed. Mountain Meadows Massacre, mostly women and children. One other big difference is that we can definitely link the Fort Utah battle to Brigham Young ordering it. I don't think Brigham Young was too worried about it because they were Indians, right? And this was happening all over the country. It was almost expected by the U.S. government to clear them off your land. So all of the sources, or maybe not all, but most of the sources and most of the accounts and information was not destroyed, linking it back to Brigham Young. There's plenty of evidence about this battle being linked to Brigham Young. Whereas with the Mountain Meadows, almost all that information and data and accounts and sources was destroyed. Don't believe me? Go and watch my video on the Mountain Meadows Massacre cover-up. So it's interesting. We can link these Indian battles to Brigham Young and exterminating all these Indians, but we can't with the white travelers for Mountain Meadows Massacre. But we're just supposed to believe that he didn't order the massacre at Mountain Meadows. And that's the church's official position right now. They've come out with 2 books about it, and that's where kind of the goalpost is, to protect Brigham Young. He didn't order any of that. He didn't kill these white. He didn't order the extermination and killing of white people. But when it comes to Indians, there's all kinds of proof. So in my mind, I'm thinking he does it to the Indians. He'll do it to the whites. All right. So one thing I failed to mention on the previous slide is probably the reason why Brigham Young decided to keep all of the native women and children alive is because he wanted to turn them into indentured servants. We're going to get to all that information. There's a lot of data and a lot of accounts showing that that's exactly what the Mormons did. They turned them in. They tried to turn them into indentured servants. And then they tried to raise the children as Mormons. None of that worked out, which we'll get to. I have a ton of information about that. But that's probably the reason, and it wouldn't have gone over very well to turn white women and white children into indentured servants, white slaves. That just wouldn't have gone down very well. All right, so let's talk about the Gospel Topics essay, Peace and Violence Among 19th Century Latter-day Saints. Came out around 2014, so that is after Jared Farmer's book, one thing to note. So in that essay, and this is on the church's website, Governor Young authorized a campaign against the Utes in Utah Valley. A series of battles in February of 1850 resulted in the deaths of dozens of Utes and one Mormon. So they say dozens. They probably don't want to say 100, right? Even though Marlin K. Jensen did say 100. Then in a footnote in this same essay, footnote number 29, they say contemporaneous sources indicate that the number of Indians who died was between 24 and 40. We know that it's a lot more than 24. We actually counted the skulls and beheaded a bunch of the Indians. Though a much later reminiscence places the death count among the Utes at around 100, and that was from Epsie Jane Williams, her autobiography. We have that account. They don't talk about Jared Farmer. They probably knew about Jared Farmer because his book came out in, 2008. He thinks if you add everything together, people being shot, people dying of exposure, people dying of measles, probably even higher than 100. All right, same Gospel Topics essay here, Peace and Violence Among the 19th Century Latter-day Saints, 2014. Using a source here from Winkler, an article in the Utah Historical Quarterly in 1987. In these instances, like Utah Valley, the church says, and others, some Latter-day Saints committed excessive violence against native peoples. Yes, they're being a little more honest here. If you combine some of these massacres together, there was a lot more Indians killed than wasn't killed in Mountain Meadows Massacre. So all you have to do to get to numbers a lot higher than Mountain Meadows is just to add up 2, 3, 4, 5 of these battles or massacres of how many Indians the Mormons killed. All right, so on January 31st, 1850, in a meeting, this was shortly before the battle, Brigham Young said the following. This is in the Brigham Young collection. I say go and kill them, kill the natives. Tell Dimmock Huntington to go and kill them. And Dimmock was one that promised they were not going to push them off the land or kill them. Now Brigham's telling Dimmock, go and kill them. Also, Barney Ward, let the women and children live if they behave themselves. So Brigham wanted the women and children to live. See this direct statement from Brigham. If they behave themselves. Because why? They wanted to bring them into their households. We have no peace until the men are killed off. Never treat an Indian as your equal. All right, statement from the prophet Brigham Young again, journal history, May 28, 1849, so about a year before the battle. Had a different strategy here earlier on from Brigham. It will be better for our settlement not to be so familiar with the Indians. It makes them bold, impudent, and saucy, and will become a source of trouble and expense to you. Keep them at a respectful distance at all the time, and they will respect you the more for it. So he wanted to kind of distance himself from the Indians here. was kind of a strategy, and then that didn't really work, and so then he started killing them. So don't be too familiar. It makes the Indians bold and impudent. That's makes the Indians disrespectful. It makes the Indians saucy, or basically disrespectful. Okay, let's go to an account that is in William Clayton's journal, June 1847, so about 3 years before the battle. Brigham Young encountered a famous frontiersman named Jim Bridger, maybe kind of like the one pictured above, as the Mormons made their approach to the Great Basin. They ran into this guy named Jim Bridger. Bridger advised the Latter-day Saints to stay away from Utah Valley, as the Utah tribes of Indians inhabit the region around Utah Lake and are a bad people. If they catch a man alone, they are sure to rob and abuse him if they don't kill him. This is the natives to the whites. They are mostly armed with guns. However, according to historian D. Robert Carter, the Mormon militia had superior rifles. So the Indians had guns, not very accurate guns. The Mormons had guns that were superior, and I think you could aim them more accurately. All right, the professor and historian Jared Farmer talks about this in his book, how these natives got their guns, in his book On Zion's Mount. The Utes had more people and probably more guns, having acquired many new firearms from a third unexpected population group, the 49ers, who were on their way to California to try to get gold. The 49ers happily traded guns and ammunition for fresh horses. All right, so we're kind of talking about here about what they had on each side, guns, equipment, horses. The Mormons had around 83 animals, including saddle, team horses, and mules. So about 100 men and about 83 animals, including horses and mules. This is George W. Howland to Daniel H. Wells, February 5th, 1850. I think that's right before the battle. Utah Territory military records. All right, some more information from Max Perry Mueller. Came out with a book called Race and the Making of the Mormon People, 2017. The Mormons could use violence to suppress threats to their settlements, not because they enjoyed state authority, but because they enjoyed superior tools of war. Such tools included bullets, cannons, forts, and well-trained militias. Superior tools that they used. So maybe better bullets, maybe better guns. They had a cannon, I think, which wasn't very effective in this battle, but it did really scare the Indians psychologically. They had forts, for defense, which the Indians didn't have. I think they were holed up in a cabin for a while, the Indians were, but they didn't have forts, and they didn't have well-trained militias, probably trained, in more of modern warfare. All right, so another thing the natives had to worry about was disease that was brought in by the white people and the Mormons. This is from Thomas G. Alexander, his book, Utah, the Right Place. Not sure if he wrote that whole book. Looks like he did if you look at the cover. Shortly after the arrival of the Mormon pioneers to the Great Salt Lake Valley, the Timpanogos of Utah Valley faced a renewed challenge, something unseen and deadly: European diseases. Death from disease carried by the Mormon settlers was not their first encounter with this hidden enemy, but now it was permanent and perpetual association with Mormon settlers brought increased terror and bewilderment to the Indians of Utah Valley and of the Great Basin in general. All right, getting to a few things that happened shortly before the battle. This is LDS Journal History again, March 1st, 5th, and 6th of 1848. So a couple years before the battle. The remainder of 1847 and most of 1848 was a period of generally peaceful relations with the Indians, though in March of 1848, a 45-man posse was sent in pursuit of Indians about Utah Lake, who had stolen 17 cattle and 1 horse. So these were called native Indian depredations. They were stealing cattle. They were stealing horses, and the Mormons had to deal with this. All right, same source here. Contact was made east of Utah Lake, but no fighting broke out. The Indian chief whipped the 2 principal thieves, and all promised to do better. Okay, same source here, journal history in March of 1848. The High Council at Great Salt Lake City reported that the marshal of the posse was sent out with discretionary power and plenty of force, an indication that the Mormon settlers were stiffening in their attitude toward the stealing of stock, and that further such depredations might be dealt with harshly. Okay, new source here by Howard A. Christie did a very good article called Open Hand and Mailed Fist, Mormon Indian Relations in Utah, 1847 to 1852, Utah Historical Quarterly, 1978. He also talks about Hosea Stout's diary. By early 1849, however, relations between the Mormons and the Utes had begun to deteriorate, responding to reports of many horses being stolen and cattle being killed by renegades in Tooele Valley, southern Great Salt Lake Valley, and Utah Valley. Brigham Young dispatched a company of militia under Colonel John Scott with orders, according to Hosea Stout's account, to take such measures as would put a final end to their depredations in the future. All right, Howard Christie continues. Colonel John Scott, with his detachment of 35 men, entered Utah Valley on March 3rd, 1849, so about a year before the big battle, and was informed of the location of the renegade band by a local Ute Indian named Little Chief. The detachment then proceeded to surround the band, and on March 5th laid siege. The Indians answered a challenge to surrender with a shower of arrows, and a 2-hour battle ensued. This is before the battle at Fort Utah. All 4 warriors were killed, but there was no militia casualties. All right, Christie continues here, Utah Historical Quarterly. Scott's detachment returned to the Great Salt Lake Valley the next day, followed by the squaws and children of the slain. So even like a year before the major battle, they were taking the women and children and taking them to Salt Lake and just killing the men. The action, carried out with determination and dispatch, was apparently in contravention of Brigham Young's previously proposed policy that Indians would not or should not be killed for stealing. So I guess that policy is kind of changing at this point. Okay, another account about Little Chief, Oliver B. Huntington's diary. I guess Little Chief responding to the killing of 4 of his friends, 4 of the natives, by the Mormons. Little Chief howled and cried and screamed and smote his breast in the greatest of agony, and he blamed and cursed the whites, and said it would not be good medicine for 2 or 3 of them to come there alone, as they had done before, because maybe now they're pissed, and if 2 or 3 of the Mormons come alone, maybe the Indians will kill them. So at first, Brigham Young tried to establish peace, but it was not to be. LDS Journal History, now or April 19, 1849. Brigham Young warned the colony the next day to look out for the Indians, not to make them any presents but if they would be friendly, to teach them to raise grain and to quit stealing. Not something that the Indians really wanted to do, though. All right, LDS Journal History, May 7th, 1849. Brigham Young now thinking about being violent to the Indians, as they would not stop stealing horses and cattle, I guess. On May 7th, 1849, the prophet Brigham Young remarked that old Indians will not enter into the new and everlasting covenant or gain knowledge, but they will die and be damned. Not surprising that the Indians don't want to convert to Mormonism, right, and enter into this covenant. So Brigham says that if they don't do that, then they're going to die and be damned. He admonished the people to stay at home and mind your own business, and the Indians will do the same. And if they come and are not friendly, put them where they cannot harm us. Right? 6 feet under. All right, some information from Fred Conta. Again, A History of the Northern Ute People, 1982. He says in 1849, Fort Utah was established at present-day Provo, Utah. I think originally just called Fort Utah. The site of the fort was an area which had been used by the Ute people for centuries as a major campsite, and then the Mormons just built right on it. The fort lay directly in the way of several hunting trails. Wikipedia says the fort was built around March 12th, 1849. All right, back to Howard Christie. Despite growing concern over the Indians, expansion was a primary theme during the summer of 1849 and the following October Church General Conference. They're also talking about expanding down there at Fort Utah or Provo. And this is like a more modern picture of kind of what it looks like today. Most of the people there not realizing that this used to be Indian land probably, and most people living in Provo probably have no idea about this battle. Okay, moving on to another source. Ray C. Colton did a master's thesis called A Historical Study of the Exploration of Utah Valley and the Story of Fort Utah. BYU master's thesis in 1946. It's somewhat apologetical, leaves out some of the more controversial stuff, like some statements from Brigham Young. Originally, I had a lot more in this video from Colton, but then I started to realize that it was pretty apologetical. But I still left some stuff from it. Usually you're pretty good with master's theses or doctoral dissertations. This case, not so much. About the 1st of August, 1849, according to Colton, 3 of the Utah Valley settlers, Ivy, Stoddard, and Zabriskie, met an Indian in the field near the fort called Old Bishop. Apparently, this native looked like Bishop Newell K. Whitney. Okay, same source here. Ivy claimed that the hickory shirt that the Indian was wearing was his, stated that it had been stolen, and demanded that it be given up. So this whole battle started because of a shirt? I don't know. Okay, this native old bishop refused to give the shirt up, saying that he had bought it. They tried to take it from him by force. All right, old bishop drew his bow, and in defense, Stoddard shot him through the head, killing him instantly. Okay, deciding to keep it a secret and fearing the results, the native's body was dragged to the river, weighted with rocks, and sunk to the bottom. All right, Ray C. Colton continues in his master's thesis at BYU, 1946. Not getting to camp that night, he was soon missed, old bishop. Parties of Indians searched for him all night, but his body was not found until the next day, it soon leaked out as to who were the perpetrators. Okay, immediately there was great excitement among the red men. This according to Colton, using language from 1946, red men. They at first demanded the murderers, the Mormons, which was refused by the whites. They then required compensation in cattle and horses, but the colonists did nothing to satisfy their demands. All right, so supposedly Brigham Young heard about the old bishop murder in 1854 for the first time. He inserted the account in his manuscript history with the following comment: "These facts, which were hid at the time, explained to me why my feelings were opposed to going to war with the Indians, to which I never consented until Brother Higbee reported that all the settlers in Utah were of one mind in relation to it and going to war." And then at that point, Brigham Young did consent, I guess. There's some information in Carter's book that Brigham Young probably did know about this old bishop murder back in 1850, not 1854. So you can find that in his book. Okay, another account here from George W. Bean, Mormon Fort Utah settler. You can see the sources here. Shortly after this, horses and cattle of the settlers were found with arrows sticking in them, and on several occasions persons were shot at while away from the fort. So some Mormons being shot at by the Indians. Okay, some information from Peter Gottfredson, History of Indian Depredations in Utah, 1919. He says that cattle and horses were stolen from time to time by the Indians, and the colonists were ordered off of the land with serious threats if they failed to leave. Okay, let's go to another source, History of the Utah Stake, January 1850, unpublished document, Church Historian's Office. Says, under the date of October 15th, 1849, Isaac Higbee wrote to President Brigham Young from Fort Utah, reporting that the Indians had been troublesome for several weeks. Okay, same source. The savages, as they say back in the day, or the natives, had shot at Jabez Nolan, R.T. Thomas, and James Ivy. They had been shot at. They killed 2 animals belonging to the settlers and stolen some corn. Okay, some of the colonists had told the Indians that they were angry. Consequently, the main body of the Indian encampment marched out of their camp towards the fort and then halted. Okay, so 3 of the natives, 2 of whom were naked and unarmed, with one carrying a stick with feathers tied to it. These 3 advanced and met representatives of the colony outside the fort. All right, same source, History of the Utah Stake. The Indians then stated that they had heard that the whites were angry with them and had come to make peace. A peace council was then held, in which the peace pipe was passed around. All right, the Indians still persisted in stealing, however, and were very saucy, annoying, provoking, threatening to kill the men and take the women. Remember, this is from the white Mormon perspective here. All right, same source. Here it is quoting the prophet Brigham Young in a statement that he gave on October 18th, 1849. So just a few months away from the big battle. So Brigham says, take care of your corn and your grain of all kinds, stockade your fort and attend to your own affairs, and let the Indians take care of theirs. This is an AI image of what a fort may have looked like in Utah. This is, of course, this fort is a lot bigger, I think, than the one that was actually in Provo. All right, the prophet Brigham Young continues, let your women and children stay in the fort and the Indians stay out. But while you mix with them promiscuously, you must continue to receive such treatment from them which they please to give. So Brigham kind of blaming it on this promiscuous association with the Indians, becoming too familiar with them, hanging out with them. I don't think that really was the issue. Okay, Brigham Young continues, let any man or company of men be familiar with the Indians, and they will be more familiar, and the more familiar you will find, the less influence that you will have with them. So don't associate with them. Don't be too familiar with them. I think some of the Mormon kids were, hanging out and playing with the Indian kids. All right, same source here, and Brigham Young is saying that the Mormons need to have dominion over them, and that the Indians are not equal with the Mormon whites. So Brigham continues, if you would have dominion over them, which is what they wanted, for their good, which is the duty of the elders, you must not treat them as your equals. You cannot exalt them by this process. If they are your equals, you cannot raise them up to you. Okay, Brigham continues, October 18th, 1849. You have been too familiar with them. Your children have mixed promiscuously with them. They have been free in your houses, and some of the brethren have spent too much time in smoking and chatting with them, instead of teaching them to labor. Not sure why Brigham Young didn't want them associating. Maybe he knew down the line that they were going to have to kill them, and didn't want the Mormons to resist or refuse or not go along with the program. I'm not sure. All right, Brigham Young continues. Such a course has encouraged the natives to become idle and ignorant, the effects of which you will begin to feel. You must now rid yourself of these evils. All right, back to the historian Jared Farmer on Zion's Mount. Tensions reached a boil in the bitter cold of January 1850. Out of anger and hunger, the Timpanogos appropriated cattle. By the end of the month, the settlers had lost between 50 and 60 head of cattle. All right, LDS Journal History says the same thing. January 9th, 1850. The situation was getting very critical. A letter was received in Salt Lake City, January 9th, 1850, from Alexander Williams and others at the fort, informing Brigham Young that the Indians were stealing horses and cattle and threatening war. I think pictured above, LDS Journal History. Church History Catalog. I'm not sure if that's open to researchers or not. One time it was put on some DVDs for libraries, which is very hard to find. I haven't never been able to find it. Okay, so the next day, January 10th, the prophet Brigham Young makes another statement. This is also in the Journal History. He's trying to have peace here at first, but it doesn't take long for him to change his mind. So Brigham says, why should men have the disposition to kill a destitute, naked Indian who may steal a shirt or a horse, and think that it is no harm when they never think of meting out a like retribution to a white man who steals, although he has been taught better from infancy? So he seems to know about that shirt from, what was it, Old Bishop? The Old Bishop incident, because this is January 10th, 1850. Okay, going back to Howard A. Christie's article in the Utah Historical Quarterly. Determined to take action, Isaac Higbee traveled to Salt Lake City to petition personally for authority to launch a punitive expedition. On January 31st, 1850, he attended a meeting with President Young, his counselors, the Quorum of the 12, and militia commander Daniel H. Wells, who would go on to lead this militia at the Fort Utah battle. Wells is pictured above. Daniel H. Wells would go on to become an apostle. a member of the First Presidency, and mayor of Salt Lake City. So he would become a very important person in the church later on. All right, an account from Peter W. Conover on this same date, January 31st, 1850. Biographical sketch of the life of Peter Wilson Conover, unpublished journal. It's in the 1880s, though, so I think this is a long time after the fact. He says that Isaac Higbee sent Peter W. Conover and Miles Weaver by express to Salt Lake City to lay the case before Brigham Young, making the trip in 4 hours by horseback, which was unusual. They reported conditions at Fort Utah as extremely perilous. Only 4 hours to make that trip from Provo to Salt Lake. I wonder how long it would take to get down to Cedar City, where the Mountain Meadows Massacre occurred in that area. All right, LDS Journal History again, January 31st. They stated that the brethren were agreed in asking privilege of defending themselves and chastising the Indians. Okay, some more information from Christie's article again. This is about the Apostle Parley P. Pratt, pictured above. He was recently returned from his southern exploration in the state of Utah. Parley argued that the only alternatives were abandoning Utah Valley, which would result in a break in communications with settlements further south. They could also defend the Utah Valley settlement, or they could leave the Utah Valley settlers to their destruction. Parley P. Pratt, recommended that it is best to kill the Indians. All right, and we have a statement from the apostle and in the First Presidency, Willard Richards. Richards says that my voice is for war and exterminate them. All right, Howard Christie continues. The prophet Brigham Young, convinced of the need for action and persuaded by the unanimous recommendation of all those present, he ordered a selective extermination campaign to be carried out against the Utah Valley Indians. Okay, so this information is also from Howard Christie's article, and he's talking about Daniel H. Wells' Special Order Number 2, which can be found in the Utah State Archives. You can see the full source documentation here. So Christie says that the prophet Brigham Young ordered that all the men were to be killed of the natives, women and children to be saved if they behave themselves, which we talked about, and the military orders were immediately drafted to that effect by General Daniel H. Wells. Wells' Special Order Number 2, which is dated January 31st, 1850, and addressed to Captain George D. Grant, commander of the militia company sent from Great Salt Lake City. And I guess a Special Order Number 2 reads in part the following. So I guess at first Grant was the captain, and then Wells would take over, I think, after. So this special order says, you are hereby ordered to cooperate with the inhabitants of the said Utah Valley in quelling and staying the operations of all hostile Indians, and otherwise act as the circumstances may require, exterminating such as do not separate themselves from their hostile clans and sue for and sue for peace. So here's the order. Let's exterminate them. All right, so here is an account of the dialogue of the January 31st, 1850 meeting with Brigham Young, the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12, etc. This is in the Brigham Young collection. And you can see the rest of the source here. And we already read this at the beginning of the video, but here it is again, this meeting basically telling the saints and the Mormons to go to war with the Timpanogos. So the prophet Brigham Young is quoted as saying, I say go and kill them. Tell Dimmick Huntington to go and kill them. He was the interpreter. Also, Barney Ward, let the women and children live if they behave themselves. We have no peace until the men are killed off. Never treat the Indian as your equal. All right, Daniel H. Wells, Special Order, January 31st, 1850. We've talked about this already a little. I think it's Special Order number 2. The soldiers had instructions to spare the women and children, except when demanded by attendant circumstances. And I think they mostly left the women alone. I think there's only 1 or 2 native women deaths. Okay, another source here, Daniel H. Wells' narrative, Utah Historical Quarterly, 6, 1933. General Daniel H. Wells wrote in his narrative, written some years later, that he left for Utah Valley 10 days later with orders not to leave the valley until every Indian was out. Wells also said in this account that the Indians were completely defeated. All right, Journal History, February 1st, 1850. The prophet Brigham Young, in the First Presidency, Willard Richards, Apostle George A. Smith, Attorney General Daniel H. Wells, Captain George D. Grant, Council of 50 member Thomas Bullock. All of these went to see Captain Howard Stansbury, U.S. Army engineer, and discussed the situation with him and his aide, Lieutenant Gunnison. Pictured above, I think we have Stansbury. So they kind of wanted to know what the government would think, and Stansbury was like the best they could do, I guess. Stansbury was on a mapping mission, I think, in Utah. All right, back to Ray C. Colton, his master's thesis. When asked by Governor Brigham Young what view the government would probably take, Captain Stansbury not only warmly approved an expedition against the hostile Indians besieging Fort Utah, but he assigned Lieutenant Howland and Dr. Blake to accompany the expedition. He also contributed liberally in giving them Army camp equipment, guns, and ammunition. So that was probably better than what the Indians had. Stansbury didn't like the natives because they had been stealing some of his livestock as well. All right, Jared Farmer also says that Stansbury wanted to complete his job of mapping Utah and the Utah Valley, and the Indians were making that hard. So Farmer says Stansbury was convinced that the completion of the yet unfinished survey or mapping of Utah Valley in the coming season must otherwise be attended with serious difficulty, if not actual hazard, unless the savage marauders were eliminated. So yeah, Indians weren't very much in favor with the Mormons, with Stansbury, with the government kind of being cleared off of people's land, probably all across America. Jared Farmer, pictured above, looks like a pretty young man there. All right, so Howard Stansbury actually did a pamphlet or a book called Exploration and Survey of the Valley of the Great Salt Lake of Utah in 1852, so only about 2 years after the fact. Seems like he's getting most of his information, or probably all of his information, from the Mormons and their perspective and their point of view. So Captain Stansbury made the following statement regarding the Indian depredations in Utah Valley at this time and the conference with the Mormon leaders. So Stansbury says the Indians became more insolent or rude and arrogant. They boasted of what they had done, driving off the stock of the inhabitants in the southern settlements, resisting all attempts to recover them, and finally firing upon the people themselves as they issued from their little stockade, Fort Utah, to attend to their ordinary occupations. All right, Howard Stansbury continues. President Brigham Young was at first extremely adverse to the adoption of harsh measures, but after several conciliatory overtures had been resorted to in vain, Brigham very properly determined to put a stop by force to further aggressions, which, if not resisted, could only end in the total destruction of the colony. All right, before coming to this decision, the authorities called upon me, Stansbury, to consult as to the policy of the measure and to request the expression of my opinion as to what view the government of the United States might be expected to take of it. What would the government think of this Fort Utah battle? All right, knowing as I did most of the circumstances and feeling convinced that some action of the kind would ultimately have to be resorted to, as the forbearance already shown had been only attributed to weakness and cowardice, and had served out to encourage further and bolder outrages by the natives, I did not hesitate to say to them that in my judgment the contemplated expedition against these savage marauders was a measure not only of good policy, but one of absolute necessity and self-preservation. So, yeah, Stansbury, a good friend of the Mormons here, I think. All right. I knew that the leader of the Indians was crafty and bloodthirsty and a savage who had been already guilty of several murders and had openly threatened that he would kill every white man that he found alone upon the prairies. If that's true, it's because the white people, the Mormons, came in and took their land, right? All right, LDS Journal History, February 2nd, 1850. As you can see, we're going along here in chronological order. On February 2nd, 1850, Brigham Young called together a number of prominent military and civic leaders, meeting in the Council House in Salt Lake City. The Indian depredations at Fort Utah were discussed, and a decision was reached to subdue them. General Daniel H. Wells made a public call for volunteers. All right, the following day, February 3rd, 1850, Captain George D. Grant gathered the first company of about 50 men at the Bowery in Salt Lake City, which is pictured above here. Yeah, Grant, I think, was the first captain. Okay, we have an account for the very next day. John Scott to Elijah Thomas, February 4th, 1850, State of Deseret Papers. I think this is in Carter's book, Founding Fort Utah. Colonel Scott ordered from Elijah Thomas 4 gallons of his best brandy at the cost of $8 a gallon. This liquid courage was intended for use by the battalion now ordered out against the Indians. So we got Mormon militiamen drinking brandy. All right, Wild Bill Hickman and John H. Beadle talk about this in their book, Brigham's Destroying Angel, 1872. The canteen full of liquor was passed around frequently, maybe a brandy, maybe something else as well, which inspired their minds and made assurance of an early victory the next morning. So a little bit of liquid courage, as it said on the last slide. All right, a statement from Stansbury, also February 4th, Journal History. Understanding that your expedition against the Utah Indians is about to start today, I, Stansbury, am anxious that you should have the use of everything that I have that may be of advantage to its successful issue. All right, same date, February 4th, Journal History. Stansbury has already furnished all of the arms or guns that he has. Should there be anything else, I hope that you will not hesitate to apply to me for it, and should it be in my power, it shall be at your disposal. The services of Dr. Blake and Lieutenant Howland are to be entirely without compensation, so just donated, they being under the pay of the government, and I hope that they may prove serviceable to the campaign. So this is probably helping out the Mormons quite a bit with all the guns and ammo that Stansbury has. All right, back to Colton. Second company of 50 volunteers was placed under command of Major Andrew Little, gathering at Big Cottonwood Creek, making a total of about 100 men for the expedition. So somewhere around 100 Mormon militia. All right, back to Stansbury. Upon application of President Brigham Young, leave was given to Lieutenant Howland of the Mounted Rifles to accompany the expedition as its adjutant. Such assistance also was furnished as it was in my power to afford, consisting of arms, tents, camp equipage, and ammunition. All right, a couple days later, February 6, 1850, in the journal History, it talks about Brigham Young accompanied by Apostle Ezra T. Benson and General Daniel H. Wells, traveled to the rendezvous of the militia at Cottonwood, where Brigham Young addressed them briefly. At 10 a.m., the troops started on their journey south. So we got all kinds of links to Brigham Young about this battle. All right, the next day, February 7th, 1850, journal History. The militia continued their march, traveling all night in order to take the Indians unawares and secure an advantageous position. The weather was intensely cold, there being nearly 2 feet of snow covering the entire Utah Valley. So, yeah, when some of the native men had to run up into the mountains to escape, I think some of them froze to death. All right, the very next day, February 8th, 1850, the troops arrived after midnight, which would be early in the morning. This is from the company bugler Robert T. Burton and Edward W. Tolledge's History of Provo Tolledge Quarterly Magazine, 1884, so long after the fact. All right, Tolledge continues here. A council of war was held immediately between the Salt Lake militia and the fighting men of Fort Utah under Captain Conover, planning the campaign the next morning. So Lieutenant Ferguson gave some numbers here on February 8th, the early stages of this battle. This comes from a report in the Brigham Young collection you can see here. Ferguson reported 4 injured Mormons, Topham, Karn, Stevens, and Miles. And he reported 4 or 5 dead native men. So right from the start here, some Mormons getting injured, but native men's getting killed. All right, we also have a letter here from Howland to Wells, same date, February 8th, Utah Territorial Militia Records, saying about the same thing. We have not been able to ascertain how many of the Indians were killed, but we think that it was 3 to 4, and several were also wounded, as trails of blood were seen in several places. Okay, same source, giving a little more information. This is Howland to Wells, February 8th. Talks about the Mormons wounded, which was Karn. He was wounded severely, but not dangerously. Miles was the same. Stevens was wounded slightly. 2 or 3 others with spent bullets, which merely bruised their skin, so not too bad of injuries there. We had one of the red faces as prisoner, which I guess was Black Hawk. And the Mormons captured 6 horses and 1 colt. Okay, Howland to Wells, reporting on the next day's activities, February 9th. Mr. Alexander Williams was shot through the shoulder, but not dangerously. Jabez Noland was shot through the cheek and the nose, but not as dangerously. Mr. Isham Flynn was slightly wounded, I guess. 3 of their horses were killed. 4 were wounded. Among the wounded was Lieutenant Kimball's horse, I guess. Okay, according to Peter Conover, I guess in the 1880s, The Indians continued their depredations, and unaware that reinforcements were on the way to the fort, they stole 4 of Mrs. Hunt's cows out of the corral and killed them. I'm not sure if they were going to eat them. All right, Colton says that the Timpanogos Utes in Utah Valley at this time were under the command of Chiefs Elk, variously referred to as Big Elk or Old Elk. They were also under the command of Little Chief and Stick on the Head. And back to Tollage, there is a variance of opinion as to how many Indians were engaged in the battle. Tollage records that Big Elk had under his command in the engagement about 70 warriors. All right, Jared Farmer gives the same number here of about 70. He says the majority of the late Little Chief's band, perhaps 70 in number, decided to resist under the leadership of Big Elk and Patsowet. All right, a person by the name of Epsy Jane Williams Pace said that there was more Indians than that, more than 70. Epsy served as a militia nurse and was the daughter of Alexander Williams, who was an officer in the militia. So Epsy states that there were 110 Indians in number who opened fire on the cavalry, and I think this is a pretty late account. All right, Colton also talks about some other late accounts by Conover, Thomas, Booth, and Whitney that do not make any estimates about how many Indians there were. He says the Indians were powerful and had arms equal to those of the Mormons. I don't think that is true. All right, so Tollage talks about some of their fortifications of the Indians. They were protected not only by a 6 to 8 foot river band, but also by a breastwork of cottonwood trees, which they had felled. The Indians had also taken possession of James Bean's cabin and had fortified it also. All right, so the Indians kind of using this cabin as a fort. This is Orson F. Whitney, History of Utah, 1892, so again, a long time after the fact. Early in the afternoon, materializing the plan of the previous night of taking the Bean cabin at all hazards, Captain Grant ordered Lieutenant Kimball with 15 picked cavalrymen to charge on the cabin to get possession of it and open fire upon the Indian stronghold at close range. So trying to drive them out of the cabin. And back to Colton, the command was given to charge. Dashing forward through a ravine, the horsemen emerged upon the flat and were within a few rods of the house when a roaring volley from the Indian fortification met them. All right, the first 2 cavalrymen to reach the cabin were Lot Smith and Robert T. Burton, who succeeded in riding their horses into the passage that divided the rooms of the double log house, of which they took possession. So they're able to drive them out of the cabin and take the cabin. All right, according to Colton, the Indians quickly recovered from the surprise of the charge. They fired from their entrenchment on the remainder of the detachment with such force that the troopers had to take shelter under the end of the house, but half of their best horses were killed almost immediately. Supposedly, half of the Mormons' horses were killed. All right, another source here from the Mormon Provost Settler R.T. Thomas, autobiography unpublished. Sometime in the 1880s or 1890s, he's recording this. He says, during the 2 days engagement, there was a total casualty list among the whites, or the Mormons, of about 19. 19 dead Mormons. Another source for this is Tollage, which we talked about. Colton, in his thesis, also states that 18 whites were wounded. These accounts are exaggerated, in my opinion, and are well after the fact, at least 34 years after the fact. All right, back to the story. The Indians abandoned their fortifications, according to Colton. One group was going east of the Provo River in the direction of Rock Canyon, while the other, which appeared to be the majority, traveled toward the south end of Utah Lake. All right, Colton continues. A group of Mormons followed the Timpanogos Indian people up Rock Canyon. Near the mouth of the canyon, some wickiups were found. See picture above. In one of these was the body of Chief Big Elk, who had died from wounds received on the battlefield. And back to Tolledge, July of 1884 account. The militia brought a number of squaws and papooses as prisoners into the fort, women and children. The native men who went up Rock Canyon were 13 in number, being all that was left of the Indian warriors who engaged in the Provo battle. Only 13 left, according to Tolledge. The 13 left were out of a total of between 70 and 80. So, according to Tolledge, between 57 and 67 Native Americans died. And I would probably put that number up to over 100. All right, back to Christie. The prophet Brigham Young decided to launch an extermination campaign, which was seemingly in total contradiction of his position stated only 3 weeks before. He changed his mind. All right, Christie gives his reason for the reversal of Brigham Young and his reluctance to reverse his opinion, but it is suggested by his statement at a meeting held with his counselors and the 12 on February 10th, 1850. Brigham says, "I am sent now to confiscate all their property and then put them in the heat of battle and kill them." All right, Brigham continues here. This is from the Brigham Young collection microfilm. So Brigham continues, "If men had taken a different course, there would not have been any trouble. I have told them the cause of their difficulties. The cause was the shooting with the Indians, gambling, and running horses with them. I don't think that's the cause." And I don't know if Brigham Young is making this excuse up or not. All right, same source here, Brigham Young collection. Brigham went on to indicate his fear that the loss of the Utah Valley might lead to ultimate loss of the entire Utah settlement. They must either quit the ground. They must either quit the ground, or we must. We are to maintain that ground or vacate this. We were told 3 years ago that if we don't kill those Lake Utes, they will kill us. Every man told us the same. They all bore testimony. The Lake Utes live by plunder and robbing. If we yield in this instance, we will have to yield this land. All right, back to Christie's article. He says General Wells then departed for Utah Valley on February 10th. Maybe look something like the picture above. And Wells personally directed a relentless pursuit. Unit commanders were instructed to take no hostile prisoners and let none escape, but do the work up clean. So let's kill these guys clean. Also a source for this, Wells to Grant, February 9th, 1850, Special Orders number 10. All right, back to Jared Farmer. Daniel H. Wells continued on to Petite Neat Creek, where he divided the group into smaller hunting parties. And here the violence shifted from warfare to killing. So kind of maybe just in warfare, but unjust and just killing people. All right, Farmer continues. Far removed from the battleground at the Timpanogos River, it was impossible for Mormons to distinguish between hostile and friendly Indians. They no longer cared. Numerous innocent people, including a blind old man, were killed in cold blood. All right, he continues here, same account. The most bloody episode occurred at Table Rock, near the mouth of Summit Creek on the southeastern shore of Lake Utah, where one of the hunting parties tracked down a medium-sized Ute or native band. All right, Brigham D. Madsen talks about this in his book, Exploring the Great Salt Lake. This Table Mountain kind of massacre. He says, Lieutenant Ferguson says that the party surprised on Table Mountain would not give up their arms or smoke the pipe of peace. These were taken about dark and kept under guard until morning and forcibly disarmed. So if they're disarmed, shouldn't they let them live? Isn't that like just warfare? Some of the natives tried to run off and were shot while being unarmed. The rest were also shot. All right, John W. Gunnison, who was a kind of a partner with Stansbury, makes a statement here in Madsen's book. In the deserted Indian camp were 3 males and 3 females dead, and 1 old squaw in one part of the camp and a papoose in another. A small child was also found on the road, thrown away. All right, Colton talks about this. General Daniel H. Wells and Captain Grant, with the main body of the cavalry, set out upon the trail of the Indians who had gone south. Eventually, the Indians were overtaken near Table Mountain at the south end of Utah Lake, where in the ensuing fight, 5 were killed and 17 were taken prisoners and disarmed. All right, a statement from Abner Blackburn in a narrative in Will Bagley's book, Frontiersman Abner Blackburn's Narrative, 1992. Abner says, we followed the natives up and at the south end of Utah Lake, demolished them on the edge of the ice. All right, according to Orson F. Whitney and Tollage, the remaining Indians were killed. They don't talk about the disarmament. Several of the militia's horses, I guess, were killed. However, none of the whites were injured. All right, we have a letter from John W. Gunnison to Martha Gunnison, I think his wife. Great Salt Lake City, March 1st, 1850, so this is contemporary to the events, just right after. According to Lieutenant John W. Gunnison of the Stansbury Expedition, the Mormons first captured some women and children. Then the men were induced to come in on the assurance of the white men being friendly to them. The Mormons lied. This is similar to what happened in Mountain Meadows Massacre, too. They're disarmed. And then once they were disarmed, they killed them. All right, John to Martha here, same account. After a cold, sleepless night, the Ute warriors were lined up for a mass execution, even as their families watched. The women and children watched. Terrified, some of the men broke through the line and started running across the frozen surface of the lake. All right, John continues. March 1st, 1850, a couple weeks after the battle. The Saints pursued them on horseback and shot them dead. The bodies remained where they fell. At least 11 Utes lost their lives on this Valentine's Day massacre. All right, General Wells Field Dispatch to Brigham Young, February 13 and 14, 1850. So right during the battle, I think. Daniel H. Wells reported that a force of 15 or 20 warriors with their families surrendered to a militia unit under Captain Grant on the lake shore west of Table Mountain near Payson. So these 15 to 20 native warriors just surrendered. The Indians, stated Wells, came rather through fear than otherwise and seemed determined but to give up, refusing to smoke the pipe of peace. We shall deal with them in a most summary manner as soon as another day favors us with light. So they come in, they surrender, they want to smoke the pipe of peace. They're fearful. This kind of shows you the imbalance of power, right? Whatever the Mormons were doing was a lot more effective and a lot more powerful than what the Indians could resist. All right, same field dispatch from Wells to Young. In a postscript appended the next morning, Wells wrote, "Please to make some suggestion in relation to the disposal of some 15 or 20 squaws and children who probably belonged to some 11 warriors who met their fate or died in a small skirmish this morning." Not really a small skirmish, right? You're killing 11 native men. You've captured 15 to 20 women and children, natives. And he uses the language of disposal, which is kind of gross. How should we dispose of these 15 to 20 women and children? All right, so John W. Gunnison talks about this whole battle here at Table Mountain in his book called The Mormons. Came out in 1852, so a couple years after the fact. Painting, it looks like, above of Gunnison. He says, a party of Native Americans was driven up Table Mountain, but were induced to come down and surrender. Probably told them they're not going to hurt them, right? They were guarded in camp until the morning and then ordered to give up their weapons. All right, these native men refused to give up their guns and weapons, and acting in a sullen and hostile manner, were fired upon, and nearly all were killed immediately. And a few of the native men broke through the line of sentinels and endeavored to escape by crossing the lake on the ice, but they were chased down by horsemen and ceased to breathe. Ceased to breathe, in other words, killed. All right, John W. Gunnison continues in his book, The Mormons. My informant was an actor in the terrible scene and seemed disposed to paint it, this whole scene at Table Mountain, in as soft of colors as possible. This is what the Mormons like to do. They spin it, they soften it. Same thing happened in Mountain Meadows. All right, in 1982, they interviewed a Uinta Ute, Julius R. Murray Jr., who related a family story, kind of relating to what happened at Table Mountain here. Interview, August 31st, 1982, Ute Indian Interview Project. So according to the story of Julius, Brigham Young wanted the Utes all to come down and parley and leave all your guns at home. And they came down and had a big feast on the lake. And after that, that's when they killed them all. Killed most of them anyway. Shoved them under the ice in Provo. So 1982, these natives are still remembering this story, but kind of in a little bit different way. All right, there's another account that comes from the Kusharam Paiute Band. This can be found in Levan Martineau's book, The Southern Paiutes. So according to this story, a long time ago, the soldiers attacked some peaceful Indians at Utah Lake during the winter when the lake was frozen over. Many of the women, children, and aged sought to flee to safety across the ice, but were overrun by soldiers on horseback who cut their heads off with swords. And that was just the men, though. So they're talking about the women and children and stuff being killed. That's not accurate. All right. At a 1900 meeting of the Utah Indian War veterans, it was denied that such an event on the previous slide ever happened. Yeah, they didn't kill the women and children, but they definitely did kill the men. This article is called "No Indians Were Beheaded," Salt Lake Herald, August 10th, 1900, and we're going to get to some more accounts, though, of after the native men are dead, they're going to cut their heads off. All right, Brigham Young to Daniel Wells, February 14th, 1850. Brigham not too concerned about keeping the natives healthy, who they had captured. So Young to Wells on the proper treatment of prisoners. Young says, "We will not suffer Indians who are known to be hostile and have come in your possession because they were sick with measles and could not fight. Your surgeon, Mr. Blake, is no doubt well provided with medicine and will be ready to prevent that which will affect that most desirable of all objects, perfect health." We want to prevent perfect health. There's somebody that mentioned that this medicine might actually have been poison, and not sure what historian that was. All right, same source here, Brigham Young to Daniel Wells, February 14th, 1850, territorial militia records. Little Indian children taken captives may be retained by the captains and trained to service, indentured servants. Peaceful women and children voluntarily surrendered as prisoners. They may be set at liberty unless it shall appear that their relatives have been killed or they claim protection, in which case you will bring them with you for further counsel. So at first, Brigham Young was maybe open to the idea of setting them free or setting them at liberty. I think he changed his mind. All right, the prophet Brigham Young continues. I, Brigham, also recommend that the interpreters converse with those Indian prisoners, women and children, and ascertain their feelings, whether they are willing to come here, Salt Lake, and go to work, and be brought up in usefulness among the white men, etc. Basically turned into indentured servants or slaves. All right, same source, and here is where Brigham Young changes his mind, doesn't want to set them at liberty anymore. In further consideration, I, Brigham Young, have deemed it prudent for you to send all the women and children prisoners here as soon as you possibly can, whether they are willing to come or not. We will find them plenty of work, plenty to eat, etc. So at least they would survive, I guess, if they give them shelter and food. You see how directly involved Brigham Young is in all of this stuff. You know, he's the prophet. He's the governor. He makes all the big decisions, right? But with Mountain Meadows, we're supposed to believe that he wasn't involved in that at all. All right, D. Robert Carter, founding Fort Utah book. He says the morning of February 18th, 1850, the main body of troops and their Indian prisoners, 26 women and children, rode in wagons and left for Salt Lake City. All right, Jared Farmer talks about this. The Mormons carried with them dozens of these refugees. The squaws or the women were kept in 2 tents in Great Salt Lake City before being distributed to various Mormon families. All right, D. Robert Carter again. Those militiamen who fought in Utah Valley got the first choice of which prisoners they wanted. It's kind of gross. The militiamen and their townsmen showed a lively interest in the prisoners. According to the Church Historian's Office Journal on February 19th, 1850, it states that many brethren go to look at the squaws or the women that are in 2 tents north of the Bowery. It's kind of gross. Wanting them for indentured servants, maybe wanting them even as wives, I'm not sure. And back to Howard Christie, Open Hand and Mailed Fist article. He says from February 14th through the 17th of 1850, the Mormons killed 7 more natives. 1 was probably a woman. So total, I think only like 1 or 2 women were killed. And John W. Gunnison, again to Martha Gunnison, March 1st, 1850. Young and Wells ordered out 150 men and pounced down upon the red brethren in a savage manner and whipped them unmercifully, killed about 30, and drove the balance into the mountains, where many are perishing with the measles. All right, Gunnison again, writing to his wife from the Great Salt Lake City. John Gunnison noted that the Mormons brought in squaws and children, which are placed in families as servants to make white people of them, destroy their culture, basically. One old woman went off the other night with her new petticoats and some knives. The old ones will decamp when warm weather comes. When warm weather comes around, no doubt, they may make something of the children. So some of the women just kind of leaving, not wanting to live with these white people. All right, so several months after the fact, George Montgomery wrote a letter to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, July 26, 1850. Let's see, a wayfarer bound for California, George Montgomery, was so disturbed by this scene that he wrote a letter to Washington to report that there are now held in slavery by the Mormons in the valley of the Great Salt Lake about 30 Utah women, 30 native Utah women and girls who were taken prisoners in a war of extermination waged last winter by the Mormons. So all the way up here to July, these women are in slavery and are basically prisoners. All right, going back to Daniel H. Wells' narrative in Utah Historical Quarterly, he says that the saints of Salt Lake fed and took care of these native women and children until the spring, and then they ran back to their Indian camps. Many of them died, not being able to stand our way of living. So they had them for a while, and then they ran away back to their own people. I guess in that process of running away, many of them died. Their husbands, a lot of the men that took care of them were dead. All right, let's get to some number estimates. Orson F. Whitney, a Mormon guy, goes on to become an apostle, did this History of Utah, 1892, so long after the fact. He estimates the Native American Indians lost about 40 men in total. All right, John E. Booth, A History of the Provo Fourth Ward, wrote something down, an unpublished something, and we have no date, probably long after the fact, BYU Library. John E. Booth estimates the Native American Indians lost about 30 men in total. All right, R.T. Thomas, in a historical sketch of the Thomas family in the 1880s and 1890s, so long after the fact. R.T. Thomas, or Robert T. Thomas, estimates the Native American Indians lost about 62 men in total. All right, Epsie Jane Williams, autobiography, unpublished, don't have the date on here, long after the fact, I'm sure. Epsie Jane Williams Pace estimates the Native American Indians lost about 101 men in total. All right, then Daniel Wells gives an estimate to Crawford, February 1850, so this was like right around when the battle was happening. Wells says, in our engagements with the natives, our reports will show that only one man was killed, only one Mormon, and 5 were wounded of the Mormons. While of them 26 warriors are known to have been killed and 5 were wounded, while some have died through exposure, want, and fatigue. Not sure how many that was. In being routed from their retreats at this inclement season of the year. So yeah, very cold. They said it was a very cold winter. So many more of these native men died of exposure, want, and fatigue, maybe starvation, measles. Many more are supposed to have been killed and surrounded, but in accordance with Indian custom were carried away by them. So a bunch of these men killed by the Mormons carried away by the natives and maybe not counted. And D. Robert Carter gives some more estimates in Founding Fort Utah book. He says Mayer, Stansbury, Gunnison, Bean, Harmon, Brown, and Taylor are among those Mormons who reported 40 Indian deaths. John Lyman Smith claimed that there was 24 deaths, Daniel Davis 25 deaths, Daniel H. Wells 27 deaths, and William William I. Appleby 30 deaths. All right, Carter continues, Mormon pioneer casualties were much smaller, so it tells you it's a lopsided battle, much smaller than native casualties. The Utes killed Joseph Higbee. I think that was the only Mormon guy that died. 7 Mormon militiamen, Karn, Miles, Stevens, Orr, Williams, Nolan, and Flynn, received wounds serious enough to warrant mention in correspondence and journals. I think that's the number I use, so 7 wounded, 1 killed. Others received slight wounds. And the prophet Brigham Young writes a letter to apostles Orson Hyde and Orson Pratt on February 28th, 1850, a couple weeks after the battle. Young says that peace was apparently restored after killing some 20 or 30 Indians, and the squaws and children prisoners were distributed among the citizens. They were clothed, fed, and taught to work. And Jared Farmer weighs in here. Most contemporary sources estimate the number of dead natives at about 40, an example of deliberate undercounting. So this is Jared's opinion. The Mormons deliberately undercounted the number of dead native men. All right, so Jared Farmer thinks that it's reasonable that about 102 native men died. One reminiscent account, I think that's Epsie Jane Williams Pace, states that a treaty was made in April of 1850 acknowledging 102 casualties. I think she said 101 in her other account. Some kind of a treaty in April, so a few months after the fact. There is no official record of this treaty. However, 102 seems like a more reasonable estimate, especially considering that the besieged Utes also suffered from a measles epidemic and a food shortage during the coldest period of an unusually cold year. So, yeah, going to war with the Mormons was of no help in these other problem areas, right? Didn't help with them dealing with measles. Didn't help with them being able to hunt and fish for food for them and their families, and it was very cold. All right, so Farmer says that there was only 1 Mormon killed. This was the Latter-day Saint Joseph Higbee, a son of Isaac Higbee. Joseph Higbee was shot through the neck. All right, so according to the journal History, in April 1850, a few months after the fact, the native Patsowet was blamed for the murder of Isaac Higbee's son, Joseph. On April 29th, Patsowet was arrested. He was arrested, tried, and executed. Maybe he did it, maybe he didn't. All right, Wells writes to Young, February 16th, 1850, a copy of General Orders No. 2, a letter to Young. The Indians are used up and badly frightened. We think they will be willing to behave themselves hereafter. At least we hope so. So they're all used up. They're all dead. And Colton says that all sources agree that most of the Indian warriors in the fight were annihilated. All right, following the battle, Dr. Blake, the army surgeon who worked for the government, cut the heads off of the Indians that were killed and brought them to the fort. He had about 40 or 50 heads, narrated Epsie Jane Williams Pace. And he said that after the flesh was off, he was going to take them back to Washington for some medical reason. Obviously, they didn't consider how the Indian peoples would feel about this. So this comes from Epsie Jane Williams in a late account in her autobiography. All right, Abner Blackburn talked about this as well, these heads. This is from the book Provo, Pioneer, Mormon City, 1942. A few days after the last battle with the Indians, a government surgeon named Blake wanted James Orr and me, Abner, to take a sleigh across over on the ice and secure the Indians' heads, for he wanted to send them to Washington to a medical institution. All right, Abner Blackburn continues here. He says, the surgeon took out his box of instruments and commenced. It took him about 15 minutes to cut one head off. Jim and me took the job in our own hands. We were not going to wait on the surgeon's slow motion. We jerked our knives out and had those heads all off in a few minutes. All of them, I guess, 40 to 50. AI picture above. Some big, long knives there. One guy has two there. I'm not sure why I did that. All right, Abner's account continues. He says the heads were frozen and they came off easy in our fashion. The surgeon stood back and watched us finish the job. They're sharp, military, like Bowie knives, I guess. So Blake wanted to bring the Indian heads in a week or two to Salt Lake City. We took them down according to agreement. The Indian heads smelt loud. They're probably starting to rot, right? They smelt loud because the weather had turned warm. We drove to Blake's office, and he settled up. So he obviously paid them something to do this. All right, the Mormon Anna Clark Hale commented about this scene of the heads. This is in Robert Carter's book. So Anna says, I can never forget the horrible and frightening scene when the boys brought into the fort a number of Indian heads with their nasty, bloody necks and their tongues sticking out of their mouths. It was horrible. All right, Jared Farmer talks about this in his book, On Zion's Mount. Petit Neat, Tabby, and Grospine, three important band leaders in southern Utah Valley, eventually discovered the decapitated bodies. In March, they angrily confronted a representative of Fort Utah about the beheadings. All right, so moving on to another issue again, a statement from Brigham Young. This was a letter to Wells, I guess, February 14th, 1850. Right at the end of the battle, I think. The prophet Brigham Young instructed, if the Indians sue for peace, grant it to them according to your discretion and judgment in the case. If they continue hostile, pursue them until you use them up. Let it be peace with them or extermination. All right, and back to Carter. The Timpanogos lost almost everything they possessed. Their homes and nearly all of their tools, utensils, bedding, clothing, food, and horses were either captured or destroyed. The Utes found themselves destitute in the midst of an extremely inhospitable winter weather. It is a wonder that any survived. All right, back to the journal history. On February 19th, 1850, the troops who had fought the Indians in Utah Valley returned to Salt Lake City. The members of the General Assembly of the Provisional State of Deseret welcomed them back. All right, Governor Brigham Young addressed the militia, congratulating them on their safe return and response to the call. But of course, he wouldn't have done that for Mountain Meadows, right? All right, another source here, James Leach in his diary, sometime between 1852 and 1859. James says, we got to the city of the Great Salt Lake. We went up to the headquarters, and there the presidency dismissed us with their heartfelt thanks towards us and blessed us in the name of the Lord. The presidency, which consisted of the prophet Brigham Young and his counselors, Heber C. Kimball and Willard Richards, they're all saying, good job, thank you. You are now blessed in the name of the Lord. All right, another statement from Howard Stansbury, Exploration and Survey of the Valley of the Great Salt Lake, 1852. The expedition was completely successful, Stansbury says. The Indians fought very bravely, but were finally routed. I don't think it was that close, really, especially around the Utah Lake. He says some 40 of the natives were killed, and as many more were taken prisoners, the latter consisting principally of women and children, who were carried to the city and distributed among the inhabitants for the purpose of weaning them from their savage pursuits. We have to wean them from their savage pursuits, and bringing them up in the habits of civilized and Christian life. The experiment, however, did not succeed as was anticipated, and most of the prisoners escaped upon the very first opportunity. All right, Howard Christie gives his summary of the battle in his article, Open Hand and Mailed Fist, Utah Historical Quarterly, 1978. Very good article. After the Utah Valley expedition, it became customary for reports of depredation to be followed by militia action and more killings. Whereas policy towards the Indians had been geared initially to benefit both sides, it had, by February 1850, deteriorated to a policy favoring only the new settlers, the Mormons. The best land was to be taken up as fast as possible without payment. The Indians were to be strictly excluded, put off into these remote reservations, and stealing by Indians was often to bring swift punishment. All right, another statement here from a farmer. In Utah Valley, Mormons made conciliatory gestures to the surviving bands. For example, they granted confiscated horses to Grospine and released the remaining prisoners from Fort Utah. All right, statement from Brigham Young here, Journal History, November 20th, 1850. So this is about 8 months after the battle. Brigham Young wrote to his liaison in Washington, D.C. He says, "It is our wish that the Indian title should be extinguished and the Indians removed from our territory, Utah." So at this point, 8 months later, he wants all the Indians removed from all of Utah. And that for the best of reasons, because they are doing no good here to themselves or anybody else. And then in the same breath here, Brigham Young says he doesn't want to do anything evil to them. He only wants to do good to them, right? No. So Brigham says, do we wish the Indians any evil? No. We would do them good, for they are human beings, though most awfully degraded. Degraded humans, according to Brigham. He wants to do them good, right? But he doesn't want them in Utah. He wants to push them off of their land. Okay, Brigham Young continues. He says, let the Indians be removed. It is desirable that the way should be opened for a rapid increase of population of the Mormons into our new state or territory. Got to remove the Indians to do that. This picture is kind of what it looks like nowadays, with all the white Mormons in there and all the other people coming in. A lot of these Mormons in Salt Lake and Provo are not even aware of where this land came from, not even really aware of the natives. I certainly was not growing up there. Okay, Brigham Young continues. He says, there is little left here abating the white population, save the naked rocks in the soil and some naked Indians and wolves. That's all that's left there. Indians don't even have clothes. The first two we can use to good advantage, which would be what? The rocks and the soil. The last two, which are the Indians and wolves, are annoying and destructive to property and peace. So these Indians and wolves are kind of in the same category here, right? According to Brigham, they're both annoying and destructive to property and peace. They should be removed, right? Get rid of these Indians, get rid of these wolves. And he's also talking about here there's little left. In other words, game animals had been hunted out, and there wasn't a whole lot of them to hunt. Okay, Brigham Young continues here in a letter to his liaison in Washington, D.C., November 20th, 1850. Like I said, about 8 months after the battle. Brigham Young went so far as to call the wild men, the Indians, worse by far than the wild beasts. He argued that the LDS efforts to civilize the Indians had been futile. We would have taught them to plow and to sow and to reap and to thresh, but they prefer idleness and theft. All right, so the Mormons started to expand pretty rapidly here after this battle. This is from David Bigler's book, Forgotten Kingdom, The Mormon Theocracy in the American West, 2005. After the Fort Utah battle, according to David, during the next 2 years, so not very long, just 2 years, the Mormons established the following new towns in the Utah Valley, which were Lehi, which is where my grandma lived, American Fork, Pleasant Grove, Springville, which is where I got married, Payson, Spanish Fork, Santaquin, as well as many other towns further south. To these new locations came a steady flow of new settlers, mostly Mormons. So you can see that up here on the map here, right? So you got Utah Valley around that lake there, and going south, yeah, you got Provo, Springville, Spanish Fork, Payson, Salem, Santaquin, all those places established within the next 2 years. Okay, so a congressional act of 1864 forced the Timpanogos Indians to forfeit their lands and move to the Uinta Reservation, these little small unproductive areas here in orange, and the Uinta Reservation is there in that red box. Not very productive land, very hard to survive out there. And this is according to Benjamin Park's book, American Zion, A New History of Mormonism, 2024. A really good book if you're just looking for a summary of Mormonism. All right, so about 5 years later, in 1869, all of the Indians in Utah Valley had been removed, pushed off into these reservations. This according to Jared Farmer. And that's it. And I thank you for watching the Brigham Young Exterminates the Timpanogos Indian People Battle at Fort Utah 1850 video.